Welcome into Cougar Tracks here on the KSL Sports YouTube and KSL NewsRadio, your legacy home of the BYU Cougars. I am your BYU insider, Mitch Harper. Happy to have you on board to this Tuesday edition of Cougar Tracks. It's a newsy day for BYU basketball, and that's where we start things off with our top story of the day.
The top story of the day. The biggest story in the world of BYU sports right here on Cougar Tracks.
On the eve of National Signing Day, BYU basketball picks up a very intriguing and newsy type of commitment. Abdullah Ahmed commits to BYU, and typically you just think, oh, just a standard college basketball commitment. 6'10", 220 pounds. What's different, though, is Ahmed played for the Westchester Knicks of the G League, and the G League has been a hot topic in college basketball as Ahmed becomes the third player to transfer, or not transfer, but to commit from a G League team previously and now going to college basketball. Santa Clara got a player, and then Louisville as well. BYU picks up Abdullah Ahmed, a.k.a. Bidu, and he's going to be someone that plays next year. Joe Tipton of Rivals reported that Ahmed will join at the winter semester and then play next season. He fits perfectly into the role of Keba Keita as that rim-rolling five for BYU. I mean, you see some of the highlights of Ahmed, his ability to get to the rim. He's also a good defender, too. Shot blocker, and that's going to be something that works quite well. And for him to potentially learn under Keba Keita's guidance, that's huge for BYU. But again, we live in a world now where G Leaguers are coming to college basketball, and I think the basic rule of thumb would be, and this has always been the case really with anyone, players must be within 5 years of their high school graduation and never signed an NBA contract. You kind of keep it to those terms, it makes sense. BYU has guys like Alexei Kostic, who played in Austria, Arcadia Lions, and then Mihailo Boskovic, Iga Kokia, Mtel. So there's been pros that are currently playing at BYU and in college basketball from overseas that are part of the program now. And back in October, when Kevin Young was asked by KSL 5 TV's Sam Farnsworth his thoughts on the idea of G League players joining college basketball, because not many coaches have been very supportive of this idea, to Kevin Young, who's got a G League background, worked his way in professional basketball, this makes sense to him. This was KY back in October in Kansas City on the idea of G Leaguers playing in college basketball.
That makes tons of sense to me because it's the exact same thing as the European players. I don't think that, it's literally the exact same thing. Yeah. Now look, if you're an NBA guy that's on an NBA contract, I mean, the G League is no different than the Euro League. It's not the NBA. It's just not. Now, if you're on a two-way contract and you're on an NBA contract, you're an NBA player. If you're not, what's the difference of a guy coming from all these European clubs? So it's the same thing. So I'm a lot of things that make sense don't actually happen. For me, this actually does make sense. Now, if you want to strip away both sets of it, okay, great. But that's kind of how I see it.
Very intrigued to see what Ahmed becomes in college basketball for BYU. But like KY, it makes sense to me. And look, I'm in the business of covering college basketball. People that are knocking how, you can't recognize college basketball anymore. Did we recognize college basketball 10 years ago when it was just one and dones and players were leaving to maybe get a European League contract? Remember about 10 years ago, 8 years ago, BYU was losing guys to go pursue European contracts. Now we live in a world where college basketball is probably the second best league for financial gain if you're a basketball player. And that naturally makes the sport better and the level of competition better. And for BYU being in the Big 12, what a great spot. And to have a coach and a coaching staff that have a lot of connections, not only to the G League, but to the NBA. They have an expansive network to connect to. So when they get word of the possibility of G Leaguers being a thing, I'm sure they can connect with people. Will Voigt was instrumental in this recruitment of Abdullah Ahmed. And Ahmed posted photos from over the weekend at his official visit to BYU. Picture with Will Voigt. Ahmed's from Egypt. Will Voigt coaching connections in his career in the country of Egypt. So I think it's good. I mean, it's strange. Yes, I'm not going to lie and say, oh, we're in a world where G Leaguers are coming to college. But if they've never had a two-way contract, never signed an NBA contract, why not? In the NIL era that we're in, why not? And for coaches and staffs that adapt and that have the networks to make it happen, it's pretty noteworthy. And Ahmed picks BYU over Big 12 foe and powerhouse Houston. So that just adds a layer of intensity to what should already be an electric night in Provo. I think it's coming up in February when BYU hosts Houston. Kelvin Sampson and the Cougs, the two-time defending Big 12 regular season champions, roll into Provo. Ahmed also had Louisville, Auburn, Mississippi State, UCLA in the mix that reached out to possibly land the former G League center. But he seems like a perfect fit to potentially replace Keba Keita next season. I was kind of looking ahead a little bit to what could be next year's roster, potentially. And keep in mind, tomorrow is National Signing Day for college basketball, and BYU's got commitments from KJ Perry, Dean Rickert, Will Openshaw. Openshaw's going to go on a mission right after signing with the Cougars. And then, of course, Abdullah Ahmed now from the G League ranks. But you look at what maybe, and again, it's only game 3 tonight for the Cougars against Delaware, and we'll touch on that a little bit later here in the show. But you kind of brainstorm what could maybe be the key pieces to next year's roster. You got Tyler Moross. You've got Moo Davis potentially. Moo Davis is interesting. I thought he looked really good in the Holy Cross game. I mean, Coach Young's been very high on the prospects of Moo Davis, what he brings defensively, but he does have a year of eligibility remaining next season. Nate Pickens joins the team next year because he's out this season with an injury. So this would be a medical redshirt or a redshirt year in general. And then he's got eligibility to run it back next season. Ahmed, I'll be curious what, Rob Wright does after this season. You would think that it should be NBA bound if he is the superstar that many envision him to be, but he's got eligibility. He's got options if he so chooses. Hadim Boop, he's got eligibility. Dominique Diomande, KJ Perry from the JUCO ranks, number 1 JUCO prospect. Xavier Staten, Alexi Kostic, Dean Rickert. So a lot of interesting pieces already when you kind of forecast ahead. And that's very dicey in this era of college basketball to say this is the outlook of what your roster is going to look like next season. But there's already some pieces there potentially for Kevin Young and his staff to work with in building out the 2026-2027 roster. Because again, National Signing Day, the signing period opens up tomorrow for college basketball, which doesn't seem to have as much fanfare anymore. I really wish we would get to a point where when recruits are able or wanting to commit to a school, they can just sign. Just let them sign. And then whatever their financial agreement, scholarship agreement is, it's no longer a letter of intent. They can just sign, and then they're locked in with that team, and whatever the terms are of that deal, they're on the board. That's what I hope we get to in both college basketball and college football, that when they're ready to commit, just sign. Because I think these signing days now are very anticlimactic. Football's got one coming up in about 3.5 weeks. Do you really realize it? No, there's just not much buildup like there once was to these events. And look, not having as much of a buildup, you don't need that for signing days, but that was part of the fun of signing day, was just that, what's going to be happening on the edge of your seat? Signing day flips. That just doesn't happen as much anymore. So I hope we get to that point. But a really intriguing commitment for BYU basketball to land Abdullah Ahmed. And Very intrigued to see what he can become in college basketball. Just turned 22 years old earlier this month, back on November 3rd. And BYU basketball is 2-0 on the season, number 7 in the AP Top 25. And over the weekend, Ahmed got to see BYU in action against Holy Cross. He was in attendance for that game. And tonight, BYU basketball, the current iteration of the Cougars, gets set to take on the Delaware Blue Hens. And Delaware, not good, 0-2. BYU is a massive favorite in this game, 35.5-point favorite. I think that might be the most interesting storyline to this game. I still think that, curious to see just, again, that chemistry building with this BYU team, finishes at the hoop, things like that. That's an area of focus. And maybe see a game where BYU goes completely off from three. I want to see that. I think this team's capable of that. I know it's a different makeup and different build with this group, but, just kind of seeing if BYU can beat that 35.5-point line, I think that might be the most interesting piece to this game. But Cougars are going to win. Delaware is number 236 in KenPom. They lost to a non-D1 in Wilmington, Delaware. So the epitome of brutality, in the words of John Rothstein. The Blue Hens have already experienced this. And it's the first ever meeting between BYU and Delaware, the Fighting Joe Flaccos, rolling into Provo tonight. Tip-off at 7. Pregame begins at 6 right here on KSL News Radio, your legacy home of the Cougars. So you can tune in and listen on the KSL News Radio app, 102.7 FM and 1160 AM. But all eyes, I think, for me and maybe people on the outside, are looking at that BYU-UConn game on Saturday. Watching a women's basketball game last night, Oklahoma and UCLA, you saw commercials during the Fox broadcast teasing BYU versus UConn. And again, we're in November, and BYU is on network TV for a top 10 clash in college basketball, and there are promos centered around BYU and AJ DeBonsa, not UConn, a program that's won 2 of the last 3 national titles. It's a special time for BYU basketball fans to currently be in the space that they're in right now, because that game on Saturday is going to be outstanding. I was watching that UConn game last night against Columbia. Silas DeMary, a guy that was kind of linked to BYU in the transfer portal cycle, transfer guard from Georgia, Alex Caravan. That's going to be one heck of a game. It's going to be an incredibly tough challenge for BYU in Boston in that game. BYU will probably be an underdog, I would imagine, in that contest. But that, to me, on Saturday is going to be just fascinating to see the barometer, because win or lose, it doesn't impact you negatively at all. If you lose the game, even if it's by 10 plus, you're okay. Like, there's no shame in losing to UConn on a neutral court, and it's not going to hurt metrics. It's not going to hurt ratings. See, that's the nice thing about college basketball compared to college football. BYU plays a top 10 team in football last weekend in Texas Tech. They get handled. That happens when you go on the road and face a top 10 team. It just happens. 3 touchdown losses are not uncommon. How many times we watch these college football playoffs, and every year teams are just getting hammered. Whether it's the 4-team playoff, last year the 12-team playoff, it's tough to beat top 10 teams. In football, if you lose in a regular season game and you're not in the chosen conferences, the Big Ten and the SEC, they'll just fade you. I'm very curious to see what happens tonight with the college football playoff rankings, where BYU lands. We'll get to that a little bit later. But the nice thing about college basketball, it's not so much centered around perceptions and things like that. It's just, you've got the data. And every day we see a net ratings when that starts to happen, I believe in December. KenPom ratings, Bart Torvik. You've got advanced metrics that can eliminate some perceptions. It's very nice. It's a great model that way, and it almost makes college basketball a little more enjoyable. Now, the top 10 clashes in college basketball don't carry the same weight and significance like a college football game nationally and for eyeballs, but it's just nice to play a game and know on Saturday when BYU takes on UConn, no matter what, everything's still in front of BYU basketball, whether they win or lose, and they control their destiny. Football still controls their destiny to some extent with the Big 12 championship game still in reach if they win the next 3. But I think what's interesting about football is just perception, seeding. Even if BYU won the Big 12, will they get a home game? I have my doubts. Basketball, they lose this game against UConn, take care of business, another quad 1 opportunities, many of which that they have on the schedule. They'll definitely be in the mix for a 2, 3, 4 seed. We saw that last year with Arizona. So BYU basketball again tonight. Delaware Blue Hens tip off at 7 inside the Marriott Center. I will be there. So will Kyle Ireland. We will have you covered with the Cougs and the Blue Hens from the Marriott Center. And then this Saturday, I will not be in Boston. I'll be at LaVell Edwards Stadium for BYU and TCU. But we'll definitely have my eyes peeled to Network Fox for BYU and UConn, 5 p.m. tip also on KSL NewsRadio as well. Let's take our final break. We'll get to some BYU football commentary from head coach Kalani Sitake as the Cougars look to move past that heartbreak in Lubbock and gear up for TCU, who's looking to bounce back as well. It's Cougar Tracks here on the KSL Sports YouTube and KSL News Radio. Welcome back into Cougar Tracks here on KSL News Radio and the KSL Sports YouTube page. Every day, the show comes to you here on this Cougar Tracks video feed on the KSL Sports YouTube or audio feed, wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, Pocket Cast, Overcast. However, wherever you're watching and listening, appreciate you for being on board to the show and would appreciate it greatly if you gave a 5-star rating and a review on the audio feeds of the podcast, or like this video, subscribe to KSL Sports YouTube. You know the drill by now. But if you could do that, be a great help to me and this show. So BYU football is turning the page. 8-1 overall this season, 5-1 in Big 12 play. It feels kind of like that Texas Tech game is just flush the film. You got to learn from it, yes. And Kalani Sitake poured over that film, but just flush it, man. Learn from the mistakes, sure, but move on. You got to move on because last year, BYU was in independence mode in my thoughts. When they showed up to Arizona State after that one loss, they just looked like, oh, season's lost. Nothing else to play for. We lost to Kansas. Everything's still in front of this BYU team, and I'm pretty optimistic that they win out the rest of the way, but as we know in the Big 12, some tricky games ahead. And TCU, 6-3, and a very underwhelming performance against Iowa State. They lost at home. Their offense completely struggled. It was a mess for TCU offensively and their special teams as well. But I did ask Kalani Sitake this week what he saw were maybe positives from the Texas Tech game. And I asked that with the context of not to, sugarcoat the loss, but really kind of figure out from his point of view, what were some things that he feels that this team can build off of coming out of what would have been a game that makes you start to question how good are you as a team. And this was Kalani on what he saw as the positives from that game against Texas Tech last week.
Some of us that we're a physical team, and they brought the physicality to us, and I thought we responded the right way. We just didn't make enough plays, and I think they took advantage of the opportunities that they had. We didn't, So I think in all 3 phases, we wanted to play complementary football. They did it, we didn't. And then even when we had an opportunity after halftime to make a comeback and then try to find ways to get back in, is why you can't. You have to start the game faster, and you have to start right from the beginning. And they were not going to let us come back in that game. They've seen enough of that in the film, and so we when we tried to get momentum and try to get back in it, it just wasn't there. But I mentioned before, the effort was there. Our guys they work hard. We just got to play smarter and we got to play better in situation football. And they're a really good team, but there's things that we can do to help ourselves. And I don't think you can make up the difference in one play. But we got to find ways to put positive plays together. I thought, we tackled well on defense and for the most part made plays, got some stops, and if you're looking at the game, the average starting position did not go in our favor. We weren't able to flip the field ever, and it's a bad time to shank a punt. And we shanked a couple of them, and so that didn't help us in our field position. The turnovers didn't help us in a lot of different ways, and when it's all said and done, we normally do that to people. They don't usually do that to us, and we're 3-0 deficit of the turnover margin, and then they got after us. I thought at the beginning we had some really good things, stuff in the run, and then to muff punt, bad timing, all that stuff played into it, but. The guys kept believing, they kept fighting, and now we'll see if that belief can carry on to this next week. I believe the guys are embarrassed by that game, and I believe that they're gonna be coming in here ready to work today, and I bank on it. That's the type of guys that they are.
I'm confident that BYU will bounce back too, and I like that Kalani put it out there and just said they're embarrassed by this, because that's always my biggest thing about that Texas Tech game was that you got handled. The field position piece was a noteworthy item, too. We talked about that in the Friday preview between BYU and Texas Tech. Texas Tech was averaging field position going into that BYU game, their own 36-yard line, and it got only better coming out of the BYU game. I believe their starting field position was their own 40. I mean, it was just excellent field position throughout for Texas Tech. BYU could never capture momentum. But now you got to just turn the page. And in Kalani Sitake's words, circle the wagons, he shared some positives that he also saw, or some takeaways that he saw from the defensive side. That was a positive against Texas Tech. I do believe that, even though 29 points allowed, Kalani sees this as a circle the wagons moment for this team.
I don't think they gave up at all. That's what I like, that they kept fighting through it. And, we wanted to go to the very end and try to find ways to get it. In fact, in the end of the third quarter, we decided to punt the ball because we felt good about our defense getting out of the drive, and we wanted to pin them deep in the in the red zone. We've done it before, and we decided to punt it, pin them deep, hopefully get the field position flipped our way where we can make them punt out of their backed up and be in a position where we can have a shorter field for our offense, and then we shank another punt. And so that's not good, so it's hard when you're trying to execute things and things like that break down. And the sad thing is that Sammy hasn't done that all year. He hasn't shanked punts at all. And to have both of his shanks show up here in this game is unfortunate. But regardless, the defense kept playing, and those guys never gave up. And there's no finger pointing here. In fact, with all three phases, those guys know they got to work together. We'll circle the wagons. We understand what's being said outside. We never listened to it before, and if we did, now this is the time to not listen to it. So we'll circle the wagons, get back to work, and that's the remedy. Got to get back to work and figure this thing out. And we're still in a good position, though. I want to. These guys have worked really hard. We're in a really good spot where we can still control our destiny, and the destiny starts with this week, learning from the game over the weekend, and then getting it over with, and knowing that we got to go to work, and then seeing ourselves perform much better this weekend.
Taking on TCU this weekend is BYU. Number 12 in the AP poll is the Cougars. We'll see what happens tonight with the college football playoff rankings, but they're going up against a TCU team that still has quarterback Josh Hoover. And still to this day, Josh Hoover's career high was that performance 2 years ago where he went off for 439 passing yards against BYU. Remember that game? It was 44-11. TCU just crushed BYU. It seems like no matter who the coach is, who the players are, TCU's just got something against BYU where they have this edge. 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011 in Arlington, BYU's first year in independence when Riley Nelson, I think, high-fived the ref. And then 2 years ago in Fort Worth, that was a beatdown. I think that in West Virginia 2 years ago, those were the two games, and maybe add Texas Tech from last week into the mix too. Well, Iowa State as well 2 years ago too. There were some beatdowns in 2023, but I digress. 439 passing yards 2 years ago from Josh Hoover. That remains his career high. I asked Kalani what he's seen in Josh Hoover since that game 2 years ago in Fort Worth, and Kalani knows Josh Hoover is still one heck of a quarterback.
More deadlier. Now he has more experience, and he's got he understands the offense. You see him making checks. He's just a veteran now. Back then, we were hoping that maybe him being new to the scene and inexperienced would be in our advantage, and it wasn't. So now he's a much better quarterback, and you see in the way he distributes the ball to all different receivers, the way that they run the ball, the way that he reads RPOs, and I mean he's a really good quarterback, coached really well, and so this isn't going to be easy, but that didn't go well for us a couple of years ago, and we remember that. So we're going to have to find ways to be better than we were against him the first time around, and we get to have him at home, which is going to be helpful for us.
Hoover's passed for 2,690 yards this year, about a 3-to-1 TD to INT ratio. He's completed 65% of his passes. Really good. But TCU's had some close losses this year where they just can't get over the hump. I mean, last week against Iowa State, they lose 20-17 in a first half, too, where they only scored 3 points. They didn't score a touchdown, TCU. And when you think TCU, think that high-powered offense, their defense can get pretty salty, too, with Andy Avalos, the defensive coordinator, former Boise State head coach. So this is a tough matchup. I looked at TCU coming into the year as a team that would reach the Big 12 championship game. My preseason pick was Texas Tech versus TCU in Arlington for the Big 12 championship game. A lot of respect for TCU, but with them having 3 losses in the league, it's hard to draw up a path that they get to Arlington. Now, if you get crazy and you get on I think it's B. Willis is his handle on X, B. Willis. He creates a Big 12 tiebreaker website. If you get really wonky and crazy, you can see a path for TCU to reach Arlington, but by most accounts, you would think they're going to probably be out. So are they motivated, TCU? I would expect they're going to give their best effort in this game. But I think BYU, if they take care of business, being back at home, I think defensively, I thought there was a real positives to take from that. I think they're going to be dialed in for this one. Keep in mind, Jack, one of the top receivers for TCU, he returned last week after a long absence, a second consecutive week, kind of getting his feet under him. I think that's something to monitor. McAllister as well. They've got good receivers, but I like BYU's secondary. There were some mistakes from the secondary last week, but there were also some really impressive plays. Evan Johnson had an early pass breakup against Texas Tech. I feel good about where BYU's secondary's at, especially with Jonathan Cabella really establishing himself at that nickel position. It feels like that secondary position, as Jay Hill noted a few weeks ago, truly is rounding into form despite the tough setback. It feels like their full collection of personnel outside of Tommy Parasis, who's still dealing with the foot injury, is coming back. So I like where BYU sits there defensively going up against this TCU offensive attack can be potent. And Josh Hoover has been really good against BYU, but that was 2 years ago, and I think BYU's defense has changed significantly. So BYU definitely the favorite in this game, and I'm curious to see, too, kind of the turnout from this fan base. I would expect this should be a sellout. I haven't seen any official announcement that it is a sellout. I think this is a spot where it's going to be a really cold game. I can understand where it could be easy for fans to say, I'm going to sit home, but those LaVell Edwards Stadium nights have been very successful for BYU, and I'm curious to see what the turnout will look like on Saturday night at 8:15 p.m., which you can listen to that game on KSL NewsRadio and watch the game on ESPN. But that's going to do it for this edition of Cougar Tracks. I hope all of you enjoyed it. Make sure, again, to subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating and a review. We'll have more BYU and TCU talk coming up tomorrow on the show. Maybe a player interview from practice on the program tomorrow, and then recap of BYU, Delaware, and all the latest news and notes in the world of BYU sports. So let's talk to you then here on Cougar Tracks, and it's powered by KSL Sports and KSL NewsRadio.